Hello my friends and welcome back to Chess with Konstantin. In today's game we are going to continue our lessons in the fundamentals of attacking play. And today we are going to discuss the concept of an open center. Now an open center is a position in chess where the center of the board is not occupied by pawns. In such situations, you're going to be doing a lot of maneuvering of your pieces, and you and your opponent are going to be competing over whose pieces are on most active squares. In such positions, it is very important not to waste time, and often the winning side is going to find ways to trick the opponent into moving their pieces into squares that are not optimal. Then you can gain tempi by attacking those pieces, for example with pawns or with pieces that are worth less points. And after you gain a lot of tempo, you can then use that extra time to attack the king. With this in mind, let's take a look at this game. It was played in 1963 in the USSR Championship between Gulfeld with the white pieces and Balitinov with the black pieces. And this is actually in the semi-final of the championship, so both of these players are quite good. They're masters of a very substantial strength. So the game began with pawn to e4, pawn to e5, king's pawn opening, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. This is called the Ruy Lopez. It's actually one of the oldest, if not the oldest, chess opening that we know of. It was developed by a Spanish bishop named Ruy Lopez, who lived during the Renaissance in Italy. Now we have bishop to c5 and pawn to c3. Those of you who have watched my previous videos already should recognize a position like this and know that it's possible here to capture the pawn on e5, something that I would be very much in favor for, because after knight takes e5, then you have pawn to d4, forking the knight and the bishop, and after the typical, well, you could play pawn to c6 here, of course, bishop e2, and then after this, pawn to f4 gains tempo for white, and actually white is substantially better in such positions. And after this, if black decides to play a ridiculous move like bishop captures f2, then just king takes f2, and after knight takes e5, you have d4, and white is simply winning here. So I do recommend capturing this pawn if you do run into a position like this. But in the game, white first played pawn to c3, preparing the eventual push d4, and then knight f6, d4, capture, and now pawn to e5, destabilizing black's position, forcing this knight to move. So the knight went to e4, and now white castled, and we have pawn to d5, defending the knight and opening the bishop with tempo. But of course, now you can't resist the en passant. E takes d6, and black chooses to castle rather than waste time recapturing the pawn. This is the very correct decision. Then we have d takes c7 and queen takes c7. So actually white is now, well, white is trying to capture material with this move. Pawn takes d4, and white in fact goes for that, and black pins white's queen, so that in the next move it might be possible to recapture the lost material. White plays queen c2, attacking this knight, and also kind of looking at this bishop. So both pieces are very much under attack. So we have knight takes d4, otherwise we have problems with the spin and the capturing of the bishop. So knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and rook takes d4. Notice that bishop takes d4 was impossible because the queen would have been hanging. So here, black's pieces are awkwardly placed, and we have the open center, so there are no pawns blocking the center. So now white's strategy is going to be to try to gain tempo in attacking these pieces that are placed in the center. And if white can gain several tempi in doing so and develop his own pieces in an accelerated way and two active squares, then white is going to have an advantage. So the game continued bishop to e3, an excellent move that is attacking this rook, and the rook cannot move away from this row because the knight would be hanging. Also, you're setting up a potential attack on the knight itself, with the idea that if the knight ever moves, then this bishop is going to be in trouble. And it's also not easy to find a good square for the rook. For example, after in the game we have rook d4. One possibility that you have to watch out for, that maybe here it's not optimal because the bishop is under attack. But certainly if the bishop wasn't here, you could look at these kinds of moves. So in the game, the bishop first retreated to d3, and now this is very much a threat. Also a threat is to capture the knight, because now we have a double attack on this knight. Notice how every move white is making not only accomplishes new threats, but also develops pieces on active squares and forces the black player to move the same pieces over and over again, the ones that he placed in the center of the board. So because these pieces are now targets, black is going to lose a lot of time. Queen to e5. This was the only move that actually preserved most of these pieces. And now the queen is protecting them. However, bishop takes knight on e4 anyway, and really the only reasonable response is bishop takes e3, because if you try to capture here, then you have to remember that after takes and takes, the bishop will be hanging. So this was really the only move. Now we have knight to c3, not capturing this pawn as the computer may suggest, because actually it's more strategically sound to develop the undeveloped knight. The pawn is not going anywhere, and actually, because our whole strategy revolves around gaining time as white, development is much more important than a pawn or even a couple pawns. So knight to c3, and now we have bishop to d4. Otherwise, the bishop was going to be captured, and bishop d4 is a reasonable move that maybe eventually will set up bishop takes c3. So we have rook f to e1. Now we have a devastating threat. Bishop takes h7 with check, and the queen will be hanging, so the queen has to move. Queen went to a5. Notice that the last few moves, black has done nothing except move the same pieces over and over again, while white developed a very strong attack on the black's king. So we have queen to d3. Well, the point of the move is to free up some squares potentially in the future, and set up some kind of indirect attacks on the back rank. Also, the queen can eventually come to c4, which is what happened in the game. So queen d3, bishop e6. Now we have a3, attacking the rook. Notice black doesn't have a lot of options where to move this. So black moves the rook to c4, and now we have bishop takes h7 check, king h8, and now removing the defender, rook takes e6. Not a rook sacrifice, because after f takes e6 you just can recapture this rook and be fine. The computer does suggest bishop takes f2 with check here, because if king captures on f2, then you have rook f4 check, and recapturing the rook is no longer possible. So white is still better in this position, but it's not quite as good as what happened in the game. Okay, but it's not easy to find this move. So actually we just had f takes e6. And white went ahead and recaptured the rook on c4. Then we had bishop takes c3. To avoid the hanging bishop, you may as well exchange it. And you have to save the bishop here. Otherwise, if just capture, maybe it's still winning for white, but it's much harder now. So white decided to save this white squared bishop. Now we have bishop takes b2, attacking the rook and capturing the pawn, but the rook simply moves to b1, a very active square, attacking the b7 pawn. So bishop f6 to save the piece. There are some other options, but for example, queen takes a3 is a horrible move because now you have queen e4, and it's impossible. You're going to either get mated now, or you're going to just lose a lot of material. So that's why he didn't capture the pawn on a3. So bishop f6. Now we have queen takes e6, putting the queen on an active square. Now it's impossible to capture this pawn, for example, because if he goes after that, then there is a forced mate here with queen h3 check, and you're going to get just absolutely slaughtered here. So white is using the extra time that he gained, even though material is close to being equal. The position of the pieces is such that white is much better, and it's all because of the maneuvering that happened earlier, where black's rook is out of play and his pieces are uncoordinated, and in contrast white's pieces are doing very productive work. So after queen e6, we have a queen to h5 here to stop these kinds of checks. But it doesn't save the game, because now we have rook to b5, attacking the queen and threatening really a mate on h5. So queen gives a check, but bishop comes back. There's no problem here. Now we have rook f8. Here this move doesn't work because the queen is covering that square. But we have rook f5 first, king h7, g3, freeing up the king, rook d8, king g2, king g6, rook to b5. It was actually also interesting to play bishop to b5, threatening this kind of mate. And this would have probably resulted in an exchange of rook for bishop. But we have rook to b5. Now black is trying to trade queens, but it's not quite enough, because we have queen e4 check. And now a rook sacrifice. A rook to h5 check. And the game ended in a very humiliating way. After black captured this rook, then we have queen h7 check, king g4, f3 check, and you guessed it, after king g5 we have a checkmate with a pawn h4 checkmate. This game is an illustration, and a perfect illustration, of why, even though the material could be close to equal, why tempo in chess is so important. And it is especially true in open center games. So the way you win an open center game, again, is by luring your pieces, your opponent's pieces, into vulnerable squares, and then you can attack those pieces. And if you can do it with tempo, that is to say, you develop your pieces and attack your opponent's pieces, and then they have to move the same ones over and over and over again, then you can leverage that tempo later on into a very aggressive attack. So here, I mean, black can already resign here, because white's development is just very strong. So I hope you've learned something from this game, and I hope you learned about the concept of the open center and will use it in your own games. Go ahead and go to chess.com and try it out. Try out the strategies of attacking your opponent's pieces when they're on vulnerable squares. And I hope to see you next time when we will discuss other kinds of center in this class. That is to say, the mobile center and the closed center, which are also very important and have different strategies associated with them. Thank you very much. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Konstantin out.